I'm Brita Fordice. On this episode of Rio's Tying the Fly, I will be tying a Micro Intruder. To start with, I have a 6X long down eye streamer hook, and on this one it's a number 4. I'm going to start with some gray 140 Denier thread. Go ahead and wrap my thread onto the shank of the hook, starting behind the eye and working my way all the way down the hook shank. You want to make sure that you go through and cover that whole hook shank so that no fiber or material that you tie in later is going to end up slipping, sliding, or pulling out on you. There we go. Go ahead and cut off that excess there. Now, I'm going to go ahead and grab, I have some extra small lead eyes. This is kind of tricky at times initially to get these tied in, so you're going to go ahead and do a couple wraps. It's going to be sideways there. You're going to do a couple wraps carefully the other direction. And now that it's kind of holding in there, I can go ahead and do some figure eights, back and forth diagonals, shots there, and then we're going to go around. So I'm going to go over the shank, under the eye, over the shank, under the eye, and then tighten. So kind of over-unders here. Tighten. All right, and if you're using 140 Denier thread, you shouldn't have any issue with your thread breaking by tightening that. Giving it a good hard pull on there. At this point, you could also go ahead and add some head cement to it, just a drop right there on top of the thread where you've tied the eyes in. So now I can go ahead and wrap all the way back again to where I stopped my thread before, which is directly in between the point of the hook and the barb. And now I get to go ahead and create a dubbing loop. So I've got myself here some kind of a blend of synthetic pearl translucent dubbing. Going to make a dubbing loop by cradling my thread with my forefinger, looping it back over itself, and then doing a few wraps backwards just to create that V where it meets the shank of the hook. Now I'm going to wrap my thread forward just about 1/4 of an inch to 1/8 of an inch in front of this V I've created. I'm going to take a small pinch of my dubbing. Remember, less is more when you're doing a dubbing loop, always. And we're going to go ahead and slide this in between those two pieces of thread carefully. Just a little bit there. Now I'll take my dubbing whirler, which is also the greatest tool ever. And it's got 2 hooks on it there, as you can see. I'm going to carefully hook the bottom piece of thread, really gently slide your finger out. Now I can pinch my thumb and forefinger together and spin my dubbing whirler. See how it accordions up? Once it's done that, I'm going to go ahead and let go with my thumb and forefinger, and it's spun it perfect. So now I'm going to go ahead and wrap the back end. All this is doing is creating a little bit of a pillow, I guess you could call it, for our ostrich so that it kicks the ostrich up when it's in the water and makes it so it doesn't immediately collapse. You don't want to wrap over itself, you just want to kind of wrap them right back to back, one in front of the other. All right, there's that last wrap there. And now I can go ahead and take my thread and tie this off once I've done a couple wraps to tie that down. So make sure you don't cut your thread in doing this. There we go. And now I'm going to carefully pull back those fibers, wrap backwards a little bit. There we go. So now we've got this perfect little pillow there. So the next step I'm going to be doing is tying an ostrich. So in order to do this, because this fly is going to ride this direction with the point up, I want to make sure to rotate my hook. We're going to be using some of the fibers off of a ostrich feather here. I've already cut a few of them off. I'm going to be using 4 of them in this case. You want to make sure that they're lined up so that they are all close to the same length. They don't have to be perfect, but you don't want it way off. We're going to be tying them in so that they're on top of the hook shank here, but facing backwards. You want them to extend about 3/4 of an inch beyond the hook bend. Preferably, I want 2 on each side of the hook shank when I'm tying these in. So I sort of part them go. And now I'm going to go ahead and switch hands to hold with my left hand so that I can tie these in here. If for some reason you find after you've tied them in that they're not exactly even in length, you can go ahead and gently pull on the stem that is a little long. I found by default, Murphy's Law says that you'll always accidentally pull on the wrong one, and then all of them have to be pulled on a little bit more. In this case, I surprisingly did okay. So I'm going to do a few more wraps forward just to get those locked in, and now I can cut off these excess pieces of ostrich here. All right, so my next material I'm going to be using is going to be some flat braid. So I could turn my hook around so it's back the right direction for now. This is just some silver holographic flat braid. Tie in that end piece there. Make sure it's nice and tied in, and then I can wrap my thread all the way to the front here, right behind those lead eyes. And wrap your flat braid all the way up the hook shank, making sure to cover all that thread. As you know, most intruders have that skinny body in the middle with two sort of skirts, one at the front, one at the back. So this achieves that, even though it's on a standard hook shank instead of your typical articulated shank with a stinger hook. This is a great pattern for micro spey rods and for like a trout spey. So make sure that you pay attention if you like to fish those. All right, so the next step is I have some long fiber chenille. It tends to behave a lot like a feather, so you're going to want to palmer it or fold it. What I like to do with this is take it and pull off a little bit of the end so it reveals that tiny little core there, and then that leaves me to be able to tie that in very easily without a bulky piece right at the front. Now I'm going to do approximately 3 wraps with this. Kind of pushing it back as I'm doing it. All right, now I've got that tied in. Now I could go ahead and cut off the excess. Again, careful not to cut your thread. Push it back a little bit. There we go. Now I can go ahead and rotate my hook again. And at this point, I'm going to tie in for a wing this is a marble fox, Arctic fox cross. I like the guard hairs, that dark adds some contrast to the fly. So I've cut off a chunk of that. Now what I need to do is pull out some of the underfur that ends up making it a little too water absorbent and bulky. This adds some great contrast and some movement to this fly pattern, so it's a really nice wing to put on it, especially with those black tips on it. So I'm going to move my thread so it's now behind the eye of the hook. Make sure it's point up at this point with the point on top. And I'm going to take this wing and I'm going to make sure on this that I want it to extend about 1/2 inch beyond the bend of the hook. It's okay if some of those longer fibers extend a little bit further. Switch hands with my left hand right there to hold it in. Carefully do a couple wraps and then a couple tighter wraps. Now I can go in with my scissors and cut off that excess. Make sure it's tied down even better there. The last step for this fly is I'm going to be taking a rubber leg. In this case, it's a barred, clear rubber leg with black bars. I'm going to fold it in half over my thread, as you can see. It's a really easy way to tie rubber legs in and lock them well. Now I'm going to wrap backwards so it ties them down, one on either side. Now the last step is to go in and whip finish. And I like to do a couple runs with the whip finisher. I think it's a just habit. Makes me feel like it's going to stay together better. Make sure not to get that rubber leg caught in that. And there you go. Now I'm free to go ahead and cut off that excess piece and cut my rubber legs. When you're cutting your rubber legs, you want them to go just about as long as the ostrich. So now that I'm done trimming my rubber legs, this fly is complete. and it's going to make an awesome, awesome trout spey for any trip that you're doing to Montana and Missouri River. You could fish this on some of Washington's rivers for summer steelhead if you chose. It casts really, really well. It's not too heavy on a lot of the micro spey rods and the trout spey rods in a size 2 all the way up to a 5. It's not going to end up being too heavy for those rods, which a lot of the standard streamers you're going to find are. This is great. It doesn't soak up too much water, and you'll find that every bull trout, rainbow trout, and brown trout want to eat this. So thanks again for tying with me today, and have a good day.